So June asked me to give a talk last year for the Mole Valley Arts Alive Festival, which very obviously had to be on Zoom last year. And I'm pleased to say that June has actually arranged for me to come and see you in person in February. So that's away yet. And I'm going to come and speak to you, the Leatherhead Community Association, on the theme of the Ashtead Potters. So that's looking ahead to February 2022. However, for this evening, we thought it was still better, for a variety of reasons, to stick to Zoom. And when June asked me to do this last year, we looked at Arts and Crafts Gardens in Surrey. So it seemed a very obvious development to look at arts and crafts houses, not architecture per se, but houses. So there are a lot of them, believe it or not. Surrey is awash with arts and crafts houses, and there's a very good chance that I will have missed out one that you would like me to have included, because obviously I've had to in fact cover quite a significant range, not only of buildings, but also of architects. However, I'm starting off with a cottage, top left-hand side, by Helen Allingham. I'll explain her importance in a minute. And that is a cottage that may be in Chiddingfold. She painted so many cottages in Surrey, and so many of those cottages have now either gone or been upgraded into des reses, that it's not always possible to identify the cottages that she painted. The one at the bottom, however, is identifiable because you can go and stay there. It's at Pook Hill, and I included that to give you an idea of what the Surrey style looks like. The Surrey style is very distinctive. And the tile cladding that you're looking at is one of those features. Sometimes it's squared off, and sometimes it's scalloped, which might remind you of the famous pan tiles at Tunbridge Wells. But the tile hanging is very much a feature of the arts and crafts Surrey style, because the vernacular architecture of Surrey is what informs most of the arts and crafts buildings, particularly by Edwin Lutyens. So you're seeing an early Lutyens house at the top, so top right, which dates to the around about 1890. You'll see it properly in a minute, but you can see here very clearly the sort of the big hipped gables. They like tile hanging. They go back to leaded lights. They love very tall chimneys. And many of the features, particularly in the case of Lutyens, who is from Surrey, he wasn't born there, but he was raised in Surrey at Thursley. So he relies very heavily on the Surrey style at the beginning of his career. But down the bottom, we have the other great late Victorian arts and crafts architect, C.F.A. Voysey, Charles Francis Annesley Voysey, and that's Norney, a house that I have gone to many times, which I am positively, enraptured of, though like many buildings, it sort of, it could do with a little bit of TLC. I'll explain what I mean by that later on, because these are very big houses for us to keep up in the 21st century. And one of the ways that Norney has kept itself going is by being a film set, but I'll explain more of that in a minute. So, my cast of characters, hopefully, coming up here. Here they are, like a rogues gallery. So Richard Norman Shaw is a prequel to the full arts and crafts movement in the 1890s. So I should just explain that the arts and crafts movement is officially born in 1887 with the founding of the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society. That is when the term first becomes commonly used. Like all artistic movements, it has a long gestation period, and that is under famous Victorian architects like Richard Norman Shaw, who trained many of the following generation. And down below him, you can see Phillip Webb. They've got the same birth dates. Richard Norman Shaw develops what becomes known as the Old English style, whereas Phillip Webb was much more concerned with conservation, with upgrading existing buildings. He was a very close friend of William Morris, and he will be one of the founders of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. So I like to think of them as first generation. And then the men that followed on, and again, you can see that their birth dates do sort of cluster, but Voysey is 1857, dies in 1941. Charles Harrison Townsend, he's very important for Blackheath, 51 to 1926. Lutyens himself, and those of you who are, keen on Charles Rennie Mackintosh, please remember that he is born in 1868. So Lutyens and Mackintosh are the same generation. And that rather handsome character down the bottom is the wonderfully named Mackay Hugh Baillie Scott, who is very well known today, largely because of Blackwell. And I'm wondering whether June has got Blackwell on her schedule to visit, as it's in the Lake District and is now, renowned as an arts and crafts museum. So why does Surrey become such a haven for the arts and crafts? It's interesting. We have two very distinct socio-cultural groups moving into Surrey thanks to the coming of the railways. On the one hand, we have the much put upon, a rather derogatory term now, stockbroker belt developing, with houses being bought, done up, amalgamated, several cottages into one big house, or even pulled down, and then rather ironically, a faux English cottage being built in the site. So on the one hand, you have all the development due to the railway, and many want to move to Surrey or have country cottages or holiday homes in Surrey because of the quality of the air. Hindhead in particular is where they all headed to, which was known as the Surrey Tyrol, a rather, I think, charming idea. Remembering the smog and the fog of London, you can see why Surrey became so attractive. You're close enough to London to get out to it for the weekend. So many artists move into the area, and they're very keen to capture what they saw as a rapidly disappearing landscape, with, as I said, the stockbrokers moving in and either destroying cottages to build new houses or upgrading them. So this is Miles Burkitt Foster, perhaps the most successful watercolour artist of the 19th century. He actually began his career illustrating magazines and books, but from 1850 onwards, he really made his career as a watercolour artist. So this is Wheeler Street in Witney. I don't think it exists anymore, or if it does, it doesn't quite look like this rather dishabille cottage painted by Burkitt Foster. He did not like his cottages to be done up. He kept leaded lights in case they had been removed. He was quite keen on topiary, as you can see, and there's a sort of picturesque dishabille character to the cottages at Wheeler Street. However, for his own use, he built a brand new house, The Hill, also at Whitley. And as you can see, it's what I refer to as the Old English style. Lots of half timbering, not really indigenous to Surrey, let's be honest. It's very much like Little Morton Hall, which, is, I think, in the county now of Staffordshire, but don't hold me to that. But the half timbering, although there is plenty of half timbering in Surrey, these sort of incredibly elaborate patterned Tudor Elizabethan houses, there aren't any that I know of in Surrey, but you can always correct me on that. And when we get into the arts and crafts, you're going to find that they want to be much more authentic in adapting and adopting what they think of as the Surrey style. So following on the heels of Miles Burkitt Foster, we have Helen Allingham, who's also cultivating the concept of the arts and crafts cottage. I should emphasise that these cottages are usually quite large, anywhere between 6 and 11 bedrooms. So that's not what you and I would call a cottage. But she again represents the artistic exodus into Surrey, particularly around Witney. Because of Burkitt Foster moves there. We have the famous publisher Edmund Evans. There are lots of visitors to the area. Oh, of course, George Eliot moves to this neck of the woods, and Tennyson, and at Blackdown. So one of the reasons why the Allinghams move to Whitley is because they want to live near Tennyson. They live at Sandhills, and this is one of her watercolours. She didn't live in an old property. It was a brand new Surrey style house, and she, of course, sort of encapsulates, I think, the nostalgia and mythology of the English cottage in her famous book, Happy England, which was published with Marcus Hewish. I'm showing you a portrait of Helen, one of our most successful women artists, and down the bottom, her Irish poet husband. So she particularly, again, wanted to commemorate the houses of Surrey as they were a disappearing resource. The Allinghams were part of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, and she really latches on to places like Valewood Farm, which is still with us, and is my photograph in black and white is from Country Life, and it is the absolutely quintessential Surrey cottage. So the ground level is the local Bargate stone, and then the layer above that would be wattle and daub. And the wattle and daub is protected by the tile hanging, which here has the scalloped and the rectangular variety. It has a rather nice Gothic looking door. So it's what we call a yeoman farmer's residence. He would have, been a cut above the average labourer. And I'm showing you what it looks like today, which again, I confess I have filched from the internet. I think probably the chimney has been replaced at some stage. And Helen Allingham, as you can see, loved the theme of the young woman at the cottage gate waiting to greet you, with the cottage with the roses round the door. So here it is in another watercolour. It is, from my point of view, with its leaded lights and its arts and crafts style garden with the hollyhock and the sunflowers, the sort of quintessential Surrey, what I think of as the Surrey style. So not so much the half timbering, but the Bargate stone and the tile hanging. So that gives you an idea of where we're coming from. So as I said, it's not as simplistic as saying there's no half timbering in Surrey, but there's nothing quite like Little Morton Moor, apart from perhaps this Great Tangley Manor, which is near Wannish in Surrey. This is a good example of a house that is made over in the 19th century. So Great Tangley Manor is an authentic period house. You could probably trace its origins back to the Domesday, or it's very much, as you'll see, a romantic setting in a minute, surrounded by a moat. So it's almost like a fortified farm. But it's acquired by Wykham Flower in the 19th century, who is a very well-to-do barrister and who had a lovely house on the Chelsea embankment. And he wanted this as his summer retreat. So he built on to either ends, and he got Phillip Webb to do his bidding. So this end here is Phillip Webb, and that was added as a sort of library. And then this area here was originally the entrance. So using my watercolour by the wonderfully named Anna Mary Richards Brewster, you can see what Great Tangley Manor looked like in the Edwardian era. So unfortunately, the addition here put on by Phillip Webb, this is filled in, and originally it was an open loggia, rather romantic. And then the library was this end, and it's had some alterations since then. In fact, it's had another addition put on by George Washington Jack in the arts and crafts style. But to show you how romantic it is, this I did not take, I confess, we have this wonderful aerial photograph here, which shows you that it began its life as a moated manor house. And perhaps the most eye-catching feature of Great Tangley Manor is this, the covered bridge that goes over the moat and takes you right the way up to the front entrance. This is a good example of a pre-existing building which is given a new lease of life, but is also greatly extended because the owner, Wykham Flower, wanted to use this for entertaining, particularly at the weekend. And then here now on the left-hand side, you can see an even later addition put on by George Washington Jack, wonderful name, and again, another collaborator with William Morris. He designed much of the furniture made by Morris and Co. Poor old Phillip Webb is not very lucky either in Surrey or further north around Northallerton. Many of his buildings have been demolished. In the 1950s, these big country houses were prey to demolition. We lost a major country house, one a week in the 1950s. Economic misfortunes and also higher taxation meant that many families simply wanted to demolish them. In the case of Jolwyn's at Holmbury St Mary's, which by the way always makes me think of Poirot, we have here the original house by Phillip Webb. As you can see, Surrey vernacular with barge boards or boarding another Surrey feature. This was demolished by the first Baron Green because he wanted to have this wonderful Art Deco villa, which was built by Oliver Hill in the 1930s, which you might recognise because, of course, it is indeed used in several Poirot Agatha Christie episodes. So this at Putnam, at the foot of the Hog's Back, is a Phillip Webb house that has survived. And if any of you have ever been to Standon, which is his masterwork near East Grinstead, you can see some similarities, particularly the rather nice arches here of the loggia. And of course, one of the other major problems of these big houses is if they have survived, they've become educational institutions, they might become nursing homes, or in this case, it's been divided. So that's the reason why you have a fence running right the way down the principal facade on the garden side. So if you can just imagine that disappearing, you'll get a better idea that it had a rather Italianate arts and crafts garden front. Using Rightmove, because it was on the market quite recently, I can actually show you what the inside of this Phillip Webb house looks like, and it's rather elegant and minimal, as you can see. The great revolution of the arts and crafts house was, to a certain extent, letting in a greater amount of light. So not the little leaded light little leaded lights that Lutyens favoured. I mean, Phillip Webb's houses are filled with light. If you ever get a chance to visit Standon, you'll understand what I mean. I do like these alcoves to either side of the fireplace, which is slightly off centre. The arts and crafts, less is more, but in the Old English style, as developed by Norman Shaw, there is a surfeit of half timbering, which was obviously seen to be rather romantic. So this is known as Norman Shaw's Old English style. And this was later owned by the Arbuthnot family. And my reason for mentioning them is that this is how jobs are got in the 19th century. There's a sort of interconnectiveness. You get a job because a friend recommends you to another friend, and there's a sort of mafia, I think is any way I could describe it, around the Lutyens, and the Arbuthnot's were one of the families that promoted his work when he appears on the scene in the late 1880s. So Norman Shaw's Old English style does rely very much on half timbering. The extended porch here on the front, again, has been borrowed from Little Morton Hall, but emphasising that Shaw, like Webb, wanted a lot of light in his houses. Please note these huge windows. You can see it very clearly here, but also in my perspective drawing. I rather amusingly refer to these as best of Hardwick windows. They're sort of mullions and transoms, and they diddly let in as much light as is possible, usually to the double height hallway, which again was pretty essential in the arts and crafts house, because it was all part of their use as country residences and for entertaining at the weekends. So here's the double height hall in the centre of this Norman Shaw house. So the idea was that this is where you all gathered. It was a convivial area. It's it's not a place that is like just that you pass through. This is the party heart of the arts and crafts house. There's sometimes a sort of faux minstrels gallery, and it's when you were going hunting, shooting, and fishing. This is where you would all gather either before or after you went out for the day. So it really is. These double height hallways are really the heart of the arts and crafts house. So this is a Pierrepont, which is now an educational institution at Frensham. It's another a house by Richard Norman Shaw, who is often regarded as the most important architect working in England in the 1880s, 70s. I mean, he has a long and distinguished career. We're at Frensham in terms of where we are in Surrey, which, by the way, has a particularly large quota of arts and crafts houses. It was built for a brewer, which I rather like the idea of, because as I've discovered with all my research, brewers do seem to be very great patrons of the arts. So there's the perspective drawing by Richard Norman Shaw, again showing you how big Pierrepont was. what it looks like today with its half timbering and its coving. And the important thing is that some of that half timbering is sham. It's not actually functional, particularly these pretty patterns that you see here up in the sawtooth shape of the roof line. Some of that is purely for effect, and that will be overturned by the arts and crafts movement. But you can see here again the dominance of the black and white half timbering. But the ingredient here that makes it very distinctly Surrey is the Bargate stone that's used for the lower level. So Bargate stone, which is local, and then the half timbering above, and then the important thing, that really big window that's letting in maximum light. So the Old English style was also adopted by Ernest George and his partner in crime, Peto. Harold Peto is better known as a garden designer, but Ernest George's most important house in Surrey is undoubtedly that for G.F. Watts, which is given the rather romantic name of Limersleys, Limer, of course, being the medieval name for a painter. This is not really arts and crafts. It dates to 1890, 1891. And the reason that I would still call it the Old English style is that some of that half timbering is again largely for effect. And when we get into the arts and crafts proper, we're going to discover that they are much more authentic in their approach. They're going to be almost archaeological in studying surviving properties in Surrey. Anyway, Ernest George, Limersleys or Limersleys. So obviously Limersleys was the studio house for George Frederick Watts. It was built as a summer retreat. His main studio was in near Olympia. It's in the Holland Park area. And this is George Frederick Watts' studio at Limersleys. When you go to visit Compton, that's the village that we're in, you can visit the house and you can visit the gallery and you can visit the famous chapel and the memorial chapel created by Mrs. Mary Watts. And it would appear that she practiced in Limersleys, because if you've ever been to the famous chapel at Compton, you'll know that she covered it with rather obscure decoration, that she used a very unusual medium, plaster and felt. And this is showing you the living room or salon at Limersleys, where she has practiced on the ceiling. She also practiced in the entrance. So this is sort of a prequel to how she's going to decorate her mortuary chapel at Compton. So I won't go into the complex symbolism. I love the way one of the guides here is pointing up towards the sort of wings in the center. But this section of the ceiling has got a pelican in its piety, a phoenix rising, and then in the hallway area, we've got lots of different religions from across the world, Hindu, Buddhist, Syrian, Egyptian, because she was very interested in sort of whole idea of multiple faiths. So when she designs the chapel itself, it's to be non-denominational. It's like embraces many comparative religions. So she was clearly practicing on the ceiling of her own home before she began working on the chapel, which was completed around about 1900. It's often described as the most important arts and crafts Art Nouveau building in England. So perhaps the most famous architect from Surrey is Lutyens. He wasn't born in Thursley, but his family moved there, and his father was a painter. His father painted horses. So the rather lovely Iron Duke down the bottom is not Wellington, but the name of the horse. And his father is the wonderfully named Captain Charles Henry Augustus Lutyens. The family are migrants, but a couple of generations back, coming predominantly from the Flanders area. That's where the accounts for the unusual name. It's in effect Flemish, Lutyens. So essentially, Lutyens comes from a quite artistic background, but you can tell from the fact that his father was a captain that it's not effete sort of background. His father was a manly man, you know, who was just as likely to be out hunting, shooting and fishing as he was painting horses and dogs. Quite like that idea. So they, a big family, 13 children, I think in all. Not sure that they all made it to maturity. They move out to Thursley. This is the house, again, rather euphemistically referred to as the cottage, which is situated at Thursley, which is between Milford and Hindhead. You must imagine this house overrun with children. And Lutyens himself was number 10 in the brood. So his father rather forgot about him and was rather, I think, concerned when his son intimated that he wanted to become an architect. We have lots of anecdotes about Lutyens meeting Norman Shaw and having the audacity at the age of about 15 or 16 of correcting the great architect's drawings. Gives you a good idea of how confident the young Lutyens was. But after studying with Harold Peto and Ernest George, that was the partnership, and he goes into his own, or opens his own practice in 1889, which, by the way, is the year that he meets Gertrude Jekyll. So this is also borrowed from Right Move. It's known as the Corner. It's a row of cottages, which was converted by Lutyens. He was only 19 when he got this commission of making a series of workers' cottages into a single house. And as you can see, it does indeed still retain quite a few period features. And his client, again, was a local man, Edmund Gray. But it was really falling in with Gertrude Jekyll. It wasn't just about the gardens, it was about the network that she provided, because again, her family had moved into Surrey when she was quite young, and they basically overrun Munstead. It gets quite confusing how many Munstead houses there are with a Lutyens-Jekyll connection. But her mother moves to Munstead House, not to be confused with Munstead Wood, which is the famous house that Jekyll actually commissions from Lutyens. But as I say, it extends beyond that, because she did indeed facilitate many other connections and enable the young Lutyens to get some very important commissions for quite sizable houses. So this is Littleworth Cross. It takes its name, evidently, because the piece of land that was bought by Harry Mangles was originally described as worth little. So he sort of reversed it. And I think this is it. I cast around on the internet to try and find it for you. It's said to be by Richard Norman Shaw, and you can see it's certainly in that little Morton Hall half-timbered style. Lutyens describes meeting Jekyll at Littleworth. He's just 19, and he's asked to go over to meet her. Harry Mangles was also a very important gardener who specialised in rhododendrons, which accounts for the wonderful quote. It was in 1889 that Mr. Harry Mangles asked me to meet the remarkable friend, Miss Jekyll. I eagerly accepted this privilege. We met at a tea table, the silver kettle, and the conversation reflecting rhododendrons. Mangles was one of the leading cultivators of rhododendrons. It was another passion, of course, of Jekyll. And for Littleworth Cross, we know that Lutyens designed a gazebo, a donkey shelter, a gardener's cottage named Squirrel Hill, and the drawings for these still in fact survive in the RIBA collection. So this is Crooksbury House, and this is another good example of the fact that Lutyens is often called back to make houses bigger. So this is actually the front in his vernacular style, but it's as late as 1913, 1914. He just kept being called back by the owner, Arthur Chapman, to just keep making it bigger. Extension, more children were born, or they just wanted more room to entertain. And this, again, is the reason why you often get quite schizophrenic Lutyens houses, because, as you will see, whilst the outside may be Surrey style, with the tall chimneys, the hipped gables and the tile hanging, the inside, the older section, is beautifully panelled and has a rather period Elizabethan feel to it, as you can see. But rebuilt 1913-14, we have his neoclassical style. So this is how you also end up with a house that can be a little bit disconcerting in terms of the stylistic shift. And the reason for the two names, Crooksbury House and Victory Court, Tilford, Farnham, Surrey, is it's now inevitably divided. You can see how easy it was to divide it into two sections because of the way that Lutyens had actually extended it in the Edwardian era. Another massive house, Warren Mere, again, just keeps getting bigger. But this was the home of Barbara Webb. She's a very important figure again in Lutyens' life. Helps to make lots of connections for him. Near Warren was another of the Webb houses which was being built. I love the way that you have more than one country house. And then later, after Barbara dies, it's bought or acquired by Lord Stanfordham, who makes it even bigger. So you can see it's sort of grown in a linear way. Now, I've included near Warren, not because it's particularly sort of architecturally at the cutting edge, but because it's very important in the Lutyens story. And here again, it is on the inside, courtesy of Right Move. So it's known sometimes as Warren Mere and sometimes as Warren Lodge. It was originally, as I say, associated with Barbara Webb. And it is here that Edward Lutyens courts Emily Lytton. Again, the marriage is really important because this is as in Bulwer Lytton, and their family residence is, of course, Nebworth. And Emily's own father, so Bulwer Lytton is her grandfather, her own father was Viceroy of India, which may help you to explain how Lutyens got to build New Delhi. We have this romantic quote from Lutyens talking about how important Warren Mere was in his courtship. After dinner that Sunday, we proposed a housebreaking expedition, because it's still being built, the house, with Emily by moonlight to Warren Lodge, a house he was building for Bob Webb, that's the wife of Barbara, the husband of Barbara, in the village of Thursley. They broke it through a window and wandered about, and then an epiphany. This is the moment when Lutyens falls in love. And then later, when their marriage hit the rocks, which accounts for that rather unusual quote, a wave of range, which is sort of like melancholia, evidently. Looking back, this was a very happy experience for Ned Lutyens, because after 1910, Emily gets very heavily involved with the Theosophical movement, and their marriage, I'm afraid, rather breaks down at that point. Anyway, Emily is taken off to Munstead to meet Bumps, that's the nickname for Gertrude Jekyll, and they will be married in 1897. And that's my link, really, is the garden at Warren Mere. So her boots, as you know, are actually in Godalming. This is a painting of her boots by William Nicholson. This is the rose that's named after her. And that is Jekyll gardening at Munstead House in 1878. She basically was living by the middle of the 1870s with her widowed mother. And she is using her time to develop the garden at Munstead House. And then she buys another piece of land at Munstead Wood. So Munstead Wood is originally developed as a garden. The house comes along later and in effect has to be fitted into the space. And the reason that she takes up gardening is primarily because of the loss of her eyesight. She had been a watercolour artist. That's the reason why colour is so important, seen especially in her herbaceous borders at Munstead. And she had also ruined her eyesight embroidering. She was, if you go to visit Godalming Museum, you'll see a banner that she embroidered for the local suffrage movement. But I'm afraid the embroidery hastened the deterioration of her eyesight. So these are just two examples of Helen Allingham's rendering of the herbaceous borders, the key ingredient in a Jekyll garden. She did not invent them. In fact, really, William Robinson is, if we're going to be really truthful about this, the most important gardener of the 19th century. Jekyll is really a plants woman. She's less concerned about the structure of the garden. She leaves that to Lutyens. She supplies the plants. And she actually ran Munstead Wood as really a nursery, selling, you know, not only plants, but also cut flowers. She took many ideas from William Robinson. who again begins as a plantsman for the Marquis of Waterford, of course, in Ireland. And he will meet Jekyll in 1875. She reads his books avidly and puts many of his ideas into practice. The Wild Garden, the English Flower Garden by Robinson. And he also published a very influential horticultural magazine. Courtesy of Alfred Parsons, I am showing you the beautiful Pergola at Nyman's, which is in Sussex. And his house, I'm afraid, is also in Sussex. But I have to show it to you because it's an absolutely seminal house and garden of the late 19th and early 20th century. This is grave tie, which again is very close to standard. So you can't make a day of it, I'm afraid, because grave tie is a very exclusive hotel. Go for lunch, though remember to take your credit card with you. So many of Robinson's ideas will be filtered through into the Jekyll Lutyens garden. He will supply the framework. She will buy the abundance. She will supply the abundance of flowers. His first really big commission is Chinthurst at Wonash, which again has only recently changed hands. It was owned for many years and restored by Mrs. Bonham Carter. When it was built by Lutyens for Emily Guthrie, she wasn't very happy with the house. She wanted better views out because, as you can see, Chinthurst is literally built on the side of the Surrey Hills. It's quite a difficult site. It drops down, lots of different levels, quite complex inside. So she's only there for a very brief period, about 2 years, before she sells it. And then it's purchased by the wonderfully named Lord Rendell of Rod, who lives at Hatchlands, remember, but he will buy it for his widowed daughter Rose. So her son, Goodhart Rendell, the famous architect, will grow up at Chinthurst. So he was directly influenced, obviously, by living in a Lutyens house. So just to give you an idea, again, borrowing from Rightmove, thank you, Rightmove, we're seeing the inside of Chinthurst. And it had a monastic flavour, as Jekyll put it. I'm showing you here the staircase, which is, again, using black and white. It's no longer black and white for a start off. That's seen by many to be unauthentic. So it's the natural colour of the wood. And he uses oak. And then you can see, looking through the double height entrance hallway, that sort of monastic theme. The garden itself is more architecture than plantings. You've got very structured pathways. It's a lot of topiary. We haven't got a big herbaceous border here. Around the house, it's really more paving and structure than it is wild planting. But in fact, contrary to Emily Guthrie's opinion, the house does give you spectacular views out, as you can see. Again, sort of Elizabethan feel to much of it, and even some Gothic styling, as you can see here in the windows. So another garden that is more architecture than gardens is Goddard's, where you have like a little courtyard garden in the centre. This Goddard's was a philanthropic project of the Merrylees family, and again was largely given to Lutyens because of his connections to Jekyll and to Barbara Webb. And they were making sure that Lutyens got local commissions. So Goddard's was originally built as a holiday home for distressed genteel ladies. I do love that idea. Women who were in service, governesses, they really wanted a break from it all and couldn't afford to go on holiday. They were able to come and stay at Goddard's. And then the Merrylees family sort of took it back into ownership, if I can put it that way, and it becomes a home for one of their children. So it gets bigger again. This is a classic Lutyens scenario. He starts off with quite a small house and it keeps getting bigger. We're looking here at the little courtyard in the centre. It's like a sun trap. So pull back, go the other side of the hedge here, and you can see that it has, again, a sort of monastic feel to it, because you have the wings coming out like a butterfly house, making a sun trap in the centre, and the range in the middle was a communal room for all the ladies to get together, and then their sleeping accommodation was the wings to either side. So if you really want to have the quintessential Jekyll Lutyens garden, you need one of those, a millstone. Here it's been turned into the base for a sundial, again, a hallmark of their architectural arrangements. And you're seeing here a view across the sun trap in the centre of Goddard's. His doors are magnificent. So here's one of the doors at Goddard's, a solid piece of oak with this most amazing sort of way in which the door is, I won't say sculpted, but that, you know, it's beautifully grooved. I think that's the right word. And again, it becomes a bit of a Lutyens hallmark alongside the ironwork, which should have all been made by a local blacksmith. Wherever they can, they want to use local materials and local craftsmanship. It doesn't always work, but that was the goal of the arts and crafts. No more painting it black, leaving the natural wood. A sort of dusty colour is what they wanted. And this is the communal area of Goddard's where the ladies got together for their meals. I love the hooded fireplace at one end. You can just see the door opening at the far end. That's one of these, again, very elaborately grooved doors. And there is a sort of a medieval, again, monastic feel to Goddard's. It has a skittle alley. And this is the fireplace in the skittle alley, which was designed, obviously, for entertainment for the young ladies. And then the library with its wonderful ingle nook, which again is very much in a sort of medieval styling. This is now used by the Lutyens Trust as their sort of headquarters. But you can actually hire Goddard's. It's owned by the Landmark Trust. So if you have deep enough pockets, you can, like the original distressed ladies, go to Goddard's to rest and recuperate. What a lovely idea. Now here's a really unusual Lutyens house in Godalming that you may not know at all. It's known euphemistically as the Red House and dates to 1897. But what strikes me about it is how very unusual it is, but also how very typically Lutyens. Here from the road, it looks quite long and low, doesn't it, with its giant chimneys to either side. It is actually built down the hillside in a rather precipitous manner. Some very obvious Lutyens features start to stand out. So the recessed areas above the windows are filled with a herringbone pattern of small bricks or tiles. That definitely will become a sort of Lutyens hallmark. And viewing the building from the side, you can see how it sort of literally drops down the hillside. It has a very unusual interior arrangement around a central staircase with the rooms radiating off it. However, standing outside it on the garden side, it's a little bit like looking up at the north face of the Eiger. And unfortunately, it's really difficult to get a good photograph of it. The garden is equally alpine and literally drops right the way down the hillside. So this is the best I could do. But again, it gives you a good idea of how, as at Chinthurst, Lutyens was able to accommodate a very difficult building plot. It was built for the headmaster of Charterhouse. That was the original owner of Red House. Now, Jekyll was, of course, developing her own house at around about the same time, 1895 to 1897. It was a big year for Gertrude, 1895. Her mother dies. Her brother Herbert will, in effect, reclaim the family home, Munstead House, which again was built in a Old English style by J.J. Stevenson, who is a contemporary of Richard Norman Shaw. She's already built a few properties, little properties, on the Munstead Wood site. So this is known as the Munstead Wood hut. And she lived here while they were planning her big house. And eventually this, I think, will be used by one of the gardeners. No, not the head gardener, because he'd already had a house built. So these are the beginning of our story, because these smaller houses, cottages, real cottages, are already on the Munstead Wood site when she starts to plan her big house. Remember, she never married and she never had children. She did entertain, but nevertheless, when your family are pressing you to downsize, remember that Gertrude needed a big house. And here it is, using Bargate stone throughout. There's wonderful big chimneys. And like all arts and crafts houses, it has, every side of it is varied. So I've never been the inside Untitled Wood, one of my bucket list houses to get into. But again, utilising a country life. Here we have at the top a sketch, a watercolour sketch by Lutyens of the rather lovely Tudor Beaton style staircase. The big hooded fireplace, he does like his ingle nooks. And this is just to remind you that the garden comes first. The house is designed to settle into the garden. And so there's a very, again, clear synergy between house and garden, is what we would expect in the arts and crafts milieu. So as you walk around it, each side of the house is completely different. And when Mary Watts went to visit, she was really upset because she thought it was a much nicer house than her own, built for her by Ernest George. And she was particularly taken with the dusky paleness of the oak, which you see here, of the window frames. And so we're just moving around the house. So you've now come round to the interior courtyard. And the thing about a Lutyens chic or garden is it always surprises you. So behind that hedge, you have the tank garden. This is the central courtyard. You must have a Lutyens bench, obviously. Here is the tank, there is the millstone. And the door here is into her garden room. It's very important that she had, you know, she's running this as almost a commercial enterprise. The garden room is where she had her cut flowers, where she's working. So, you know, she's not a dilettante. She really is, in effect, a professional plants woman. And of course, the most important elements at Untitled Wood are the herbaceous borders with English flowers. Well, we say English flowers, but again, we stray a little from that in terms of our love of rhododendrons. But, you know, phlox, hollyhocks, nasturtiums, evening primroses, these are all the flowers that she favoured. And then the idea is that as you move away from the house, which is sort of nestles in a rather more formal area of planting, i.e. herbaceous borders, you move out to the woodlands. So she wrote a book, Wood and Garden, Notes and Thoughts for the Practical Gardener, that's 1889. And then in Gardens for Small Country Houses, she tells us that the most precious part really of the garden is the woodland, as this gives one, as you can see in my quote, one of repose and security, while in slightly misty weather, the illusions of distance and mystery are endless and full of charm. So you have the space, you need some woodland with some rhododendrons at the end of your vista. So I mentioned earlier properties on the Untitled Wood site before the main house is completed. And this is Untitled Orchard, which was built for her Swiss gardener in 1894. Quite something, as you can see. And, you know, remember that arts and crafts gardens were very labour intensive. So she had 16 full-time gardeners to help her. The reason why Lutyens is so successful is because he has the backing of Edward Hudson, who is the founder of Country Life. He will commission his own superb house, Deanery Garden, which I'm showing you here. This, in fact, is, I'm afraid, not in Surrey, but close to Reading. It's now owned by Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, but it's important in our story because it was really this patronage from Edward Hudson. He will also ask Lutyens to reconfigure Lindisfarne for him, but it was the promotion through Country Life that then secures Lutyens' future. There's some really large, magnificent houses built in Surrey. This is Brook at Elmstead. And as you can see, is you know, it fully in the Bargate stone style with a little bit of tile hanging here, but that's in the section devoted to the stables. It has had little done to it, except by Roderick Graddidge, who I knew quite well, an architect, who has added the inevitable swimming pool. You know, they are owned by wealthy people, and so they want to have all the trimmings. Here's a house. This is another view of the same house. This is Brook. This is the main front, and this is the garden front. And I do love this sort of recessed loggia in the centre with that huge overhanging eave. It's a wonderful sort of pivotal element in the facade. But while it's all arts and craftsy on the outside, as you can see, it has a very neoclassical interior, which I'm afraid we rather cruelly refer to as Lutyens' Renaissance style, with a W, Renaissance style. Sorry, as in Sir Christopher Wren. Another magnificent house, and you can see here how he's gone up in scale. He's now working for captains of industry. So in this case, we are looking at the Prudential Assurance Company supplying the wherewithal to build Tigbourne Court, which is near Chiddingfold, and is, got some wonderful Lutyens features. So here's a close-up. This is galleting. This is when you press ironstone, in this case, or sometimes flints into the mortar. Allegedly, it's to strengthen the mortar. I think Lutyens adopts it really for effect. You can also see the herringbone arrangement here of these slender tiles that make courses through the bar gate, and all of these become sort of Lutyens' Surrey style attributes. The buildings of Voysey stand out by being completely different to those of Lutyens. And I'm not going to do too much on Voysey because I'm back in your neck of the woods in December, actually giving a lecture on Voysey houses in Surrey. So I'll just give you a little, as it were, taste and demonstrate to you how very different they are to the houses of Lutyens. Whereas Lutyens is really trying to reinvent the old Surrey style, Voysey has a style all of his own, very much based on white rough cast surfaces. And Lowick's Frensham was built for the MP, Mr. Horniman, as in the Horniman Museum. That was his father. This is Elmsley Horniman, the MP for Chelsea. And he'll have his beautiful London residence on the Chelsea embankment. It's again built as a country house for entertaining, and Lowick's will get bigger and bigger as Elmsley Horniman's family grows and the house is used for entertaining. I just want to show you the inside of Voysey's own home at Chorleywood, which is, Buckinghamshire. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how very different the interior is. None of that sort of faux half timbering or ye olde Englishy style. It's sort of like a reinvention of the English cottage style. Quite Spartan, as you can see. The clock is very famous, and you can find it in the V&A. And the reason I particularly did want to include this is that one of Voysey's most important patrons is Mary, Countess of Lovelace, who lives at Ockham. Most of the properties on the Hawkering Estate are built by Voysey with Lady Lovelace. So again, this is going to come up in my December lecture. But this clock was, there's two of them, one made for Voysey himself and one made for Mary Lovelace. And as you can see, it rather beautifully says in Latin, tempus fugit, and time and tide wait for no man. So that's a story for you to look forward to. So here again is the inside of his house at Chorleywood. And it's just to show you how very austere a Voysey style is. You do need some peacock feathers, obviously, and hearts in the back of your furniture, because east is west and home is best and home is where the heart is. And to give you some idea that it's not quite as austere, I'm going to put some colour in. So he would have had beautiful rugs to his own design. He favoured red turkey curtains, and the walls here were actually covered not with purple paint, but with a purple fabric. So when you put the colour in, it isn't quite so austere. I wanted to show you those, so you've got a good idea of what Norney might have looked like when it was originally completed for the Reverend Crane, who again, rather like the story at Chintas, doesn't seem to have stayed in his beautiful home for very long. Norney is a superstar because it has appeared in so many films, and it has had a bit of a facelift because of this. So this rather nice garden pavilion here was rebuilt for the film Wimbledon, with Mr. Bettany in it as the lead. Which was all about a young man eventually winning the title at Wimbledon, rather like Mr. Murray. Anyway, all of these production companies have rather rescued Norney over the years. And it was until recently still owned by the Clapshaw family, Russell Clapshaw, who had lived there since the 50s and was as eccentric, I think I can say this, as the house, but in the nicest possible way. But I'm afraid he died recently, and Norney is on the market at the moment. So we're all a little bit nervous about what will happen. Hopefully somebody will come along and love it as much as Russell Clapshaw did. Very recently,
The Sundial
was reinstated, and I just love these by Voysey, because it's often said it's his profile. So I'm beginning to think that Voysey was a bit of a joker. It's certainly a jester, as you can see down the bottom. And again, as you go around the house, each facade is strikingly different. So this is the garden facade. These houses had a huge impact on, of course, Mackintosh. So you can see some obvious synergies between Norney and Hill House, which is 1902 in date. Here is the architectural plan, and it's at Shackleford. This is where Norney is, for the Reverend Leighton Grain, who didn't stay for very long. Anyway, as you move around, each side is different, and it's what we class a good example of rational architecture. You can work out exactly on the outside what's going on the inside. So this bay window is in the drawing room, and this bay window is in the dining room. Here's the front. It's quite impressive, as you can see. That huge ocular window is very much a statement, and is quite unusual, in fact, for Voysey. But that lights the double height hallway, which again is an architectural tour de force. And, you know, when you start to walk around Norney, you realise just how very carefully it was planned. Again, every room has a door, so you can get into the garden. And again, the great double height hallway here was the heart of the home. I wish I could afford to buy it, but unfortunately, it's out of my price bracket. So he will echo the rounded forms of that magnificent entrance. It does look a little bit like Christopher Wren, doesn't it? The big ocular window. You see it reprised here in the mirror, in the way the upper gallery projects. He has these very distinctive grills with birds on. He loves birds and trees. And that heart here, east is west, home is best, and home is where the heart is even on the key in the lock. He is a stickler for detail. So the William Morris wallpaper that you're seeing here would not have been hung in Voysey's day, but again, it's due to the fact that it's been used most recently as a stage set for the dig, where it's supposed to be in Suffolk. And my last view of Norney is just to show you how very carefully he is thinking about how the spaces are going to be used. So there's a space in the drawing room for the grand piano, and then there's a space, this lovely bay window that looks out over the garden, which is almost like a sort of, not quite a conservatory, but brings in maximum light. And I think that's the thing I love about Voysey's houses. They are full of light. I would also quite like to have a house by Baillie Scott. So this is Mackay Hugh Baillie Scott. He and Voysey are contemporaries, and this is known as the Gatehouse, but I'll show you the house on the outside in a minute. But you can see how very different it is to Voysey. We're back with Lutyens. We're back with the Old English style. We've got the exposed beams, the brand new house, exposed beams, beautifully coloured, you know, mellow oak, not painted, split over time because, of course, it seasons as it's used. You know, that the way that they built them means that the wood has to move and grow with the house itself. That's all part and parcel of its character. And the panelling, of course, again, has that sort of historicist feel to it, but it's done in a sort of very arts and crafts manner. Here's the outside. I really wouldn't mind this one at all. Again, courtesy of Right Move. And this, as you can see, is quite late in our sequence in terms of the development of the arts and crafts house. I mean, they go right the way into the post-war era in terms of, you know, of people wanting houses that have this English character. So the loggias to either side, I think you'll agree, are rather Italianate, and the benches, of course, are courtesy of Lutyens. So this is, again, the Right Movers helped me out. I rather like this idea again of a barrel vaulted and a panelled billiard room. Oh, yes. And this is Ashworth Place at Woking, which is also another Baillie Scott house. But again, this one, I think, has been subdivided. Here's a better view of it. And this is a Baillie Scottism, this diapering pattern in the brickwork, because all of my arts and craftsmen like texture. So the texture is a very important element in terms of, you know, colour, contrasting different types of material. So the dressed stone bar gate on the edge of the building, and then the diapered brick, and then a different laying of the brick, as you can see in places, you know, bringing out different colours and textures. And this is almost like a long gallery inside the same house. But again, sadly, it is not one house, it's now divided. So coming down to earth, the last sort of section is looking at, you know, I wanted to give you a good idea of the range of arts and crafts houses in Surrey. So there's an entire artistic arts and crafts community in Haslemere. They are known rather charmingly as the Haslemere peasants, though they are far from being peasants. They all come from very nice upper middle class families. We have Godfrey Blount and his wife, and then we have Joseph King, who will marry Maud Egerton King. So it's two husband and wife teams. If you've ever been to visit the Educational Museum in Hazelwood, you'll have seen some of the amazing washboards that we are looking at, mangle boards being arranged there by Joseph King. They collected peasant art to educate their artisans. So this is by Francis Troop. It wasn't built as a house, though it's a house now. It's at the top of King's Road in Haslemere. It was originally built as the tapestry studio for Godfrey Blount. This is what they made, Godfrey and Ethel. It's all appliqué work. Their most famous piece is the one that you're seeing here, known as the Spies, which was, it's a very strange story, but essentially the appliqué was supposed to represent the Israelites going and finding the sort of golden land. They've been into the land of plenty, as exemplified by the grapes that they are bringing back. So they were the spies sent forth to find the new Eden. Anyway, there they all are making their peasant tapestries, which you and I would call appliqué work. And Francis Troop builds a very big house for the Kings, which has survived. This is it. It's not that far from Helen Allingham's home. It doesn't look like this now. Sadly, the rather strange plasterwork that once decorated the magnificent hallway entrance is long gone. And again, the house has been divided. But Francis Troop is quite an interesting, though lesser well-known, arts and crafts architect who, like Baillie Scott, is rather interested in all the different materials that he is using here in the diapered brickwork. And another sort of arts and crafts enclave is Blackheath. It clusters, this enclave clusters around Charles Harrison Townsend, rather beautiful and very, you know, you don't expect to find it, the sort of Romanesque church, which is muralled by Anna Lee Merritt, St Martin's Church. Dates to 1892, 1893. But it was commissioned by a chap called Robert Austin, who was a metallurgist, oh, sorry, I'll say that too quickly, metallurgist, and I think I'm still saying it wrong, but he was very keen to develop Blackheath as a sort of arts and crafts enclave. So I'm just showing you one of the buildings now, which was originally built as a chapel, believe it or not. There's a village hall. This was originally chapel end, but it's now been converted into a house. And that rather nice turret on the right-hand side is, I'm afraid, a much more recent addition. But the reason that Austin Roberts was interested in Blackheath was that it was closely linked, he was very heavily involved with the Royal Mint, which was one of the local industries, iron founding. And then coming to the end, a house that takes us to the Edwardian era. This is Van by William Douglas Carow. Pharaoh Carow, evidently is how you pronounce it. And again, I confess I've never had the privilege of going inside a Van. I've only seen the exterior and the magnificent garden. It's got some wonderful features, as you can see. As you enter the courtyard, there's a well hiding underneath that hedge. And then over the doorway, it's actually, you've got lead studs giving the date of 1907, 1908, which is when Caro took it on, enlarged it, restored it. He's best known as an architect, not for building new houses, but in restoring ecclesiastical properties. And this is the front entrance at the top here with the well. This is the side entrance. So he enlarged it. He sort of amalgamated elements together. But there are lots of lovely Surrey features like the boards here, the boarding, the diapered brickwork, the lovely little ingle nook here outside the sitting in, the leaded lights. This is looking at the front entrance. You might recognise this. It was used for Howard's End. And so again, another superstar house. Beautiful garden in front. This is all genuine. So the house is Elizabethan. This section here at the end was put on in the William and Mary era, so late 17th century. So it's a wonderful conflation again of old and new. And it's very difficult to work out which is old and which is new. This is the garden front with this wonderful long row of windows. And then this is Mary Caro, who, as you may know, sadly died during the pandemic. She died about, I think, April last. And it is her son, who's an architect, who is in charge of building the memorial to the COVID victims at St. Paul's Cathedral. So that's a nice sort of, I think, element to sort of come to the end of my talk. So just a couple more views, details. I love this element, which is lighting the staircase on the inside, this recessed arch here. And then this is wooden tile hanging. It's shingles. It's a technique much used in America, believe it or not. And then the wonderful way in which the brickwork here radiates around this archway, which leads to the back of the house. It's a beautifully rambling house. And the thing I would like the most is the pergola, which you can see here. It was one of Caro's additions. And to me, it's a very quintessential Surrey house with its tile hanging, its wooden shingles, its bargate stone, the integration of all of these indigenous materials. So coming literally to the end, we have houses that are still imperiled. So Durbin's, which is the home of Roger Fry on the outskirts of Guildford, is imperiled by its new owner. And this is where I tend to sort of fly my flag to make us really appreciate what we are losing as we were in the 19th century, that these houses really do need to be protected. They're very important. They tell you a lot about the artists. Charleston Farmhouse, of course, is the famous retreat of the Bloomsbury group, for which, of course, Roger Fry was such an important member of the movement. And the image down the bottom is the garden at Durbin's. And if you're hankering after an arts and crafts house, well, you might have to do with something slightly smaller, but not much. So this is the Hawkering Estate. The architect here is Walter George Tarrant, 95 residences. This is, again, on the market at Knowle Hill. So again, I think you're still going to have quite a deep pocket, a couple of million, to buy that one. But these are charmingly referred to as smaller arts and crafts houses. There's the inside. It's more Baillie Scott, as you can see, than Voysey. It's half timbering. And another, they're almost like garden suburbs. So this garden suburb is outside Woking, and this garden suburb is outside Guildford, and is again commemorated here in a book all about it by Michael Drakeford, which you can buy easily on Amazon. And again, you can see it's a gated community, and you might just be able to afford an arts and crafts house here, courtesy of the local architect, Alfred Claude Burlingham. And they were basically in charge. So for the Hawkering Estate, the architect is Walter George Tarrant. And here at the Abbots Wood, the architect is Burlingham. So to show you that it is not yet dead, here is a brand new arts and crafts house on the market at the moment. It's more Lutyens, isn't it? And Baillie Scott. I do love that lovely round arch entrance, but this dates to 2005. And it has these wonderful eaves, cat slide roofs, as we refer to them. So it's as an architectural style, quintessentially English. The arts and crafts has not died. So if I've inspired you this evening, please do check out the Lutyens Trust. As they say, they are based in Goddard's, which is now a landmark trust. If the other architects I've spoken about equally interest you, the Norman Shores of this world, or Voysey or Baillie Scott, then you might fancy joining the arts and crafts movement in Surrey. They're a friendly lot and we will welcome you with open arms. You can find out more about me at my website, anne-anderson.com. I have my own YouTube channel where if you go on that, you'll find my garden talk for last year. We're now up to around about 1,000 viewers. And I'm yet to write my book on arts and crafts architecture, but on Amazon, you can find my book on Art Nouveau architecture. So I've yet to write my one on arts and crafts. But if I ever get the chance, I'd actually like to write one about houses and gardens.